Hello. How are you today? So, there's been some disappointing things. I don't know about you, but I have heard from everybody, including myself, that um, January was its own year. I've seen the joke about it's a trial run. I've seen the joke that it was the longest year. I'm so glad we could start. Like all the jokes about 2024 being a really long year. And I'm just kind of curious if that's anybody else, Carrie, Tracy, has this been what's been happening for you? And the disappointment is part of the frustration. And for me, last month, through what felt like a year's worth of curveballs, um, at at me, at my family, at my business, and it hasn't been what I thought. It hasn't been what I thought. Yeah, absolutely. We're experiencing this some of it is January lack of sun, some of it is the holiday letdown, but a lot of it has just been disappointment after disappointment that I've heard from so many people. And I last night went live to make this announcement and talking about I've had this level of disappointment with the retreat that I was offering in February. And I've had to cancel that retreat. Now, we are doing it in March. We're still doing the retreat in March, which I'm super excited about. There's just a couple people there's a couple people that have signed up. So there's fewer spots left. So I have, I think, 10 spots left for the retreat in March. So if you're interested in that retreat and want to know more, what are you talking about this retreat? Just put retreat in the comments and I will get back to you about it. But the disappointment of canceling the February retreat was really hard. It was really hard. And for whatever reason, people didn't show up to buy it. So there's something either wrong with the timing, there's something wrong with the way I was communicating, there was something that was just off that didn't make it a match. And for whatever reason, the March date has worked better. So that is a great silver lining from that. But yesterday I was talking about handling the disappointment of what is kind of a failure, but also just it didn't work the way I wanted it to work. And yeah, the longest year of our lives. Like that's what January 24th felt like. And while there's been some great things, I have had a lot of disappointment. And yesterday live, I was talking about why sharing your disappointments as a leader is so, so important to your people. And if you pretend, one, that you never have disappointment or something that was really disappointing, maybe your team didn't meet the goal. Maybe your team missed, like you did an RFP and you weren't the ones that won it. Or maybe you were going for this really big project that has been delayed and you're facing those disappointments. If you pretend that disappointment isn't there, your team loses trust in you and it's much harder for them to follow. So as a leader, sharing disappointment is really important because it is a trust builder. And so I am very intentionally sharing this with you, but I think sometimes there's all these fears about sharing disappointments. And, even I was thinking about all the marketing people that tell me, make sure they know that it's sold out, that it's really popular, so everybody wants to join. And I'm telling you, nobody signed up. What does that mean? What's going to happen? Like the fear, the Enneagram 7 fear in me is that means I'm going to miss out. And those people who are going to miss out if they think it's not popular. What do we do with that? Now, this month, I'm talking a lot about the stories we tell ourselves and what that story is. And so one of the things that has come out of that is that's not actually true. I'd much rather share that this didn't work for some reason and the February date didn't work and the March date did, than pretend that everybody was clamoring for it and I'm canceling it. Do you see the silliness of that? And imagine that for your team. Imagine that for your team. Imagine that for your kids if you're leading your family. Imagine that for your students if you just pretend that it wasn't a big deal. It really feels a little bit like gaslighting and it erodes trust. One of the things that came from really dealing with the disappointment was opening up a really great opportunity, which was because I canceled the retreat, I now have room for 12 spots for Enneagram typing interviews, something I get asked all the time. Like, I don't really know what the Enneagram is. I don't understand it. Or I took this test and I got this report and I don't know how to read it. And all that stuff happens. And so as I have been thinking about, okay, I can't do this. What's something else that people have been asking for that I could really serve you well with? And so that is what I'm really excited about, is being able to open up 12 spots for understanding your Enneagram type, having an Enneagram typing interview, because I get it all the time. I don't really know which one I am. I took this test and I have to be honest, I don't always love Enneagram assessments. I have a couple trusted ones, but even those trusted ones have the most confusing reports. And there's like percentages that equal 429, and you're like, I don't know what that means. So I would help you really decide that, because you are the one that actually decides your Enneagram type. I am the guide to help you there. And so today I wanted to share a little bit about how the Enneagram helped me get through disappointment, and really what that means for the 9 types. So if you are new to the Enneagram and you're like, you keep saying this word and I do not know what that means. So I don't think that word means what you think it means. The Enneagram is a personality framework, and there are 9 types to the Enneagram, and they go from 1 to 9, and each type has a different core motivation. And so part of digging into the retreat in March will be understanding the core motivations of all 9 types so you can work well with your team. But it always has to start with you first. And so I really think it's so valuable to understand, what is that story? What is that core motivation? Because then it helps us deal with the other things. And so I wanted to share a little bit about how each Enneagram type deals with disappointment. How do you deal with disappointment? So I couldn't help but think of, like, I was so disappointed that I was going to have to cancel something. 1, because I would miss out. 2, because, yeah, it feels a little bit like failure, but more it feels like going backwards. And as an Enneagram 7, I am always thinking what's next is better. So backwards feels incredibly disappointing. And and so that disappointment is different than the way other people feel disappointment. So I'm just going to quickly go through what each of the 9 types do, and how to like notice and what to do for each type when you're managing disappointment. So if you don't know your Enneagram type and we go through this and you're like, "Oh, I want to learn more," just put typing in the comments and I will send you a DM about how to do a typing interview. If you do know your Enneagram type, please let me know if this resonates with you. If you're like, oh yeah, that feels like me. So first of all, I am going to start with the 8s. I know that is confusing. There is a reason, but we're going to go 8, 9, 1 and around the circle. So 8s, they tend to deal with disappointment with kind of denying it. They really are like, I don't want to be vulnerable. I'm strong. I'm just going to push through this disappointment. And so often they might minimize their responsibility in the situation. So they don't have to, so you might not feel controlled. So like, this was out of your control and you couldn't manage the scene, and that disappointment really hits you as an Enneagram 8. And here's what's to notice. So if you're not quite like here in your mind recognizing that story, really notice when your body gets going. Enneagram 8s are real body-centered people, and they kind of rev your engine. Your anger is right on the surface. That's kind of your clue to notice what are the other emotions under the anger. And also notice when you want to jump to really blaming other people or cutting other people down quickly, harshly, and that removes you from responsibility. You're like, well, you should have done this and you should have done that. If you start to notice that, that is a clue that you actually need to deal with some disappointment. And so label it. That's what you can do, is really label it. Label, this is disappointment. This feels like loss of control. What am I afraid is going to happen because of this disappointment? That's how 8s can start to manage how it shows up for you and how you can kind of manage that disappointment. So Enneagram 9s are really interested in keeping everything just calm and easy. It all feels good. Everything's fine. all of that. So if you're an Enneagram 9, let me know if that feels right. The big fancy word for it is narcotization, which I don't say very well, but it's kind of disengagement and numbing. And that habit is when that habit comes up with disappointment, you head toward the comfort activities. So every Enneagram 9 has their own comfort activities. Sometimes it's daydreaming, sometimes it's Netflix under a blanket, sometimes it's a book that, like, oh, I just want to sleep, when you weren't actually tired the moment before. Not tired, something happens, and then you suddenly feel tired. That is a clue that you might be managing some disappointment. And when you do that, this will feel opposite to what I just said about the eights. Lean into the idea of you can experience some anger. That anger will often push you out of disappointment and out of numbing into a way forward, rather than just kind of ignoring and kind of getting under the blanket. Really develop this practice of noticing how you are feeling. So I kind of want you to imagine that you have a cord that connects you kind of from your head, your heart, and your gut. So all of those things are experiencing it together, and that will help you avoid disengaging, which isn't your friend in this situation. So that's for nines. Enneagram ones, as leaders, as humans, oftentimes, because of this image of wanting to be good and right, you tend to react incredibly strongly to things that go wrong, because sometimes you assume that it's your fault and I should have done. The shoulds come up very quickly because your inner critic is kind of yelling you at this point. You should have done this. You should have done this. You should have done this. And so when you are feeling disappointment, often you might move toward this overly polite, overly accommodating, or really dismissing it as no big deal, maybe ignoring your own boundaries in order to kind of fix it. That's that way to disappointment. So what I want you to notice is, how is your body? Are you clenching? Are you holding yourself really rigid? Are you kind of in your jaw? Do you have a gnawing feeling in your shoulders, or your stomach, or maybe even tension in your fingers and toes? That is something for you to notice, that disappointment, like you're trying to defend against disappointment. The other thing for ones to notice is, really, are you flip-flopping? You're kind of going back and forth between flattery and criticism. Flattery and criticism, that's a sign that you might be dealing with some disappointment. And so get your thoughts out loud with a trusted thinking partner. Just ask them to listen to you and repeat back what you're saying. Now, clarify, here's what I want you to do. And so that will help you deal with the disappointment, because they know what you need. It's okay to experience the fear, the pain, the anger. You're still good at doing that. It's helpful to hear that out loud, because then you're just not arguing with your inner critic. We all have an inner critic, but I know you Enneagram ones have that really, really loud one. So that is the important part for you ones, is getting it out of your head, so you're not just arguing with your inner critic who's just going to shame and abuse you for failing and feeling disappointed. That's how you move on. So twos, that you have this image of being helpful, and you're kind of ruminating on all the ways you should have been helpful, and kind of like, why did this happen to me? And really jumping to obsessing over how others experience it, so you don't have to experience your own disappointment. Or you might even hedge so you don't have to experience the disappointment. So here's what to look for if you aren't sure. So if you're looking for the well done, or permission from other people more than typical, almost a compulsion to get that outside validation that you're doing is meaningful to somebody else, that is a sign that you might be dealing with some disappointment. The other thing for twos is that you might be also prone to what Brene Brown calls chandeliering, where you hit the chandelier because your anger response is something really high over something very small. So if you recognize that, you might be dealing with some disappointment. So I'm going to just pause here and see if this resonates with any of you. Do you see these reactions in you? And what is that what does that do for you when you notice these things about yourself? Um, and if this resonates and you're like, oh, okay, so now what do I do? Um, this is the time where you're like, I need to know which one of these so I can really recognize it and then make some better choices. Um, and before you, as a two, jump into helping someone else or solving, the question I want you to ask is, what is mine to do? What is mine to do? My favorite question from Suzanne Zabeel. What is mine to do? So threes always want to get to the goal because I want to keep my success intact. And that's what you're always going for. And admitting, not really admitting failure, but being hypersensitive to criticism, or even not admitting fault or pretending it's not as bad, that kind of thing. So notice when you are feeling the need to spin it, like to make yourself look good in the midst of that disappointment. Notice when you're unsure of your own feelings and putting how others perceive you as more important than understanding your own authentic emotions. Notice those things. And when you do that, I want you to come back to yourself. And that's hard for threes, but I want you to really remember that you are a human being and not a human doing. And you don't have to hustle for your worth. You don't have to hustle for your worth. So that's how part of handling disappointment. For fours, you want to maintain this image of unique and special. And it could look, when you manage disappointment, it could look like a pity party that is, why am I the only one? Or it could look like rejecting the positive information that you see in order to make the disappointment feeling bigger. I know that feels counterintuitive. Like, what? But for sometimes you just get into that. You just want to make the feeling bigger and more and more. And that's a way to manage kind of this self-inflicted pain. So you feel more in control of the pain, more in control of the disappointment. So notice if your internal dialogue blames your very way of being as shameful or damaged or never enough or too much. And this is why this happens. And that, notice if that's happening. And when you're adding and adding and adding to the disappointment, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then I burnt the toast. That's what I want you forced to notice. And practice finding the positive in the midst of pain, not ignoring the pain, but finding that next positive action that you can take. So fives have really want to be competent. And so disappointment feels like incompetence. It feels like ignorance, which is the worst. So it keeps you from connecting with other people because you've kind of gone into the situation of why don't I don't know, maybe emotionally withdrawing, or as Sherlock says, my mind castle, kind of retreat into there. And so notice when you're pulling away, noticing a pattern of isolation, and what are the triggers that spark that isolating behavior? They probably have a lot to do with disappointment. Notice that about yourself. So resist the urge to figure it out yourself. That's what I want you to resist. Resist the urge to figure it out yourself and bring some other people in. Sixes really want to be loyal. They want to be prepared. They want to stay safe. And so disappointment feels like disloyalty and this projection of casting all of these things on other people, that I was going to be prepared to this. Things like this never happen. And if you project that on other people, you alleviate your fear and anxiety. But then what it produces in you is more of this mind spiral, this more of your internal committee and thinking about it, but not actually ever dealing with the disappointment and the pain of that disappointment. So I want you to kind of notice and check in when your anxiety shows up in your body and your mind, and what are the signals of your anxiety? Where in your body do you really feel it? And when do you blame or attack others with all the shoulds and all the justs? That's when you might be dealing with disappointment and you need to handle that. And so resist that pessimistic urge that I should have been more prepared. Some disappointments are unavoidable. They're just unavoidable. And your desire to prepare is not always possible. So you don't need to go into that kind of shame spiral. And then Enneagram 7s, which we've talked a little bit about, me and how I am like, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. This optimistic self nature and kind of the well, at least, rather than simply finding another activity to do and just like, well, I'm going to do this and like move on quickly. Take some time to, instead of avoid the sadness, anger, guilt, and discomfort, to sit with it for a second. So notice when you're jumping to the silver lining with like no space in between. There's no daylight between situation. And here's the great thing. Here's what's going to happen. When you notice also when you want to run away to something more positive, or change the subject or change the activity. Those are things to notice that you might be dealing with some disappointment. And so resist that urge to escape and stay present with the emotion. When I was really like, I'm going to have to cancel this retreat. I don't see a way around it. That's when I was like, well, I could just do, like, I really wanted to, look at funny Instagram reels or go listen to my book or text a friend, or just like, I was kind of, I'll just keep busy by doing this. I didn't want to deal with the disappointment of that and make that decision. So I had to sit with the disappointment for a little while, and it wasn't long, but it was sad. And doing that is what then created the silver lining of being able to offer these Enneagram typing interviews. And so when you know your Enneagram type, that is the power of it. That's the power of being able to work through. So I'm not still sitting in a spiral. I'm not just moving around to some crazy next thing. I could really come up with a creative solution that really helps people. An Enneagram typing interview can help you discover what's the best way forward for me, not just what's the best way forward for Jen. What fits you and how you operate in the world. Water. So disappointment is a thing. We've all had some really hard stuff the last few months. It's rough. And when you're a leader, whether you're just leading yourself, your family, not just as in that's not significant, but sometimes we feel like it doesn't matter. Or if you have responsibilities for larger groups of people, teams, or even an entire organization, your ability to handle disappointment and understand your personality absolutely impacts the success of your team. It impacts your profits. It impacts your clients. And I want you to be successful in that. I want you to have more confidence. I want you to have this personalized way of moving forward that fits you. It's not cookie cutter. This is what fits me, which creates less friction. It creates actual less disappointment in the future. And you feel like, okay, I can manage this. There's a feeling of agency and confidence and like, I'm not crazy. That's the feeling I want for you. Well, like I said, we're going to dig into this at the retreat in March, the Joyosity retreat. But if that isn't an option for you and you're like, I just want to know my type. It's been so confusing. I'm intrigued by this. I'm curious. I'd love to know more. That may be another great option for you. So if you put in the comments retreat, I'll let you go information about the retreat. If you put in the comments typing, I'll let you know about typing. And I would love to offer that to you. Remember, there's only 10 spots left in the retreat. I know this is a little confusing. Retreat, 2.5 days in March in St. Louis. 10 spots left. Enneagram typing interview, 12 spots left online this February. Both of them will be amazing, but I want to know what works for you. I hope that, because I really want you to succeed. I do this work because creating positive culture with complex people is a lot of, complexity. And I want to make that simpler and easier for us because it doesn't have to be this hard. It doesn't have to be this hard. Work should be a joy. And the way we get to work being a joy and the way we get to joy at work is this work that we do on ourselves first and understanding how your personality goes into disappointment. That's what I want for you. Now let me know. We're in this together. Disappointment is hard. January was rough. Lots of people had struggles. But understanding your type helps you move through it with a lot more agency, a lot more ease, and a lot more joy. All right, Pins. See you later.